Hi everyone, my name is Deng. I'm a South Sudanese refugee writer and community activist. I will be your moderator for this session. I grew up in a small village in Ethiopia, in Western Ethiopia, and I spent most of my evenings after school listening to the radio with my father. When I was about 9 years old, I asked my dad, why can't you listen to me on his radio? My dad told me I need to learn very good English. So the next morning I went to school and asked my teacher, I'm here to learn English. And my teacher told me I should read a lot of books and listen to American television shows. Unfortunately, we do not have enough book in our tiny school library in the village, nor do we have a TV at home. But I tried what I could to learn English at that age. And in 2010, my village was attacked by an armed militia. I fled to Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya at age 11. And when I arrived at the camp, the first thing I asked the UN Refugee Agency registration officer is if I could go to school. And they told me I'll be able to go to school in the camp, and I was so happy to resume my studies in the camp. The school was a safe space where I was able to heal from my trauma and think about a bright future again. I spent 11 years in Kakuma refugee camp, and I moved to Canada last year on a full scholarship. I'm currently pursuing a bachelor degree in global affairs and digital communication at Western University. And in 2020, I spoke on BBC about a project I launched in the camp, and my dad was so proud. He watched the interview, and I was also proud too. For young refugees and displaced youth like myself, education is a powerful tool that we can use to secure more offline and brighter future for ourselves and our community. But just a few days ago, the UN released a report which revealed that the number of crisis-impact school-age children requiring educational support has grown from an estimated 75 million in 2016 to 222 million today. We cannot afford to leave anyone behind. We have to transform education for all, and all must mean all, including young people living in refugee camps and crisis-impacted places. When we talk about education in emergencies, we often look at what governments and international organizations do. We do not pay attention to the role of young people as education transformers in emergency setting. This session will highlight youth-led solutions to transform education in crisis context. And to do that, I have a wonderful lineup of speakers. First, I have Yasmin, Ms. Yasmin Sharif, Director, Education Cannot Wait. And then I will have one person joining via Zoom, Ms. Asma Rabi, a youth researcher. And then I'll have Ms. Becky Mogeni, who is here. She's a youth and student engagement and learning coordinator at the Global Campaign. And then I have as well on the stage Ms. Ratin Sazadul, Global Campaign for Education Youth Ambassador. And then we'll have a video message from Jibril Ahmed, Sudan, Arab Campaign for Education Cannot Wait. I'll start with Ms. Yasmin Sharif, and I want to ask you, how can we transform education in crisis context, and what role can young people play in transforming education in this context?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. It was wonderful to meet you outside here, since you are from South Sudan originally. And let me just quickly tell the story. The first time I came to South Sudan, before it became independent, there was one school building in an area as big as Western Europe. And to see you sitting here today with all your achievements is quite humbling. So can I start with a big applaud for you? And to my fellow youth peers, I must say, why am I sitting here? I'm an old lady, and because now it's the youth turn to speak, and they have so much more to say than my generation has. So I think that what gives me credibility is that I'm a mother of two youth, 24-year-old and 28-year-old, and when I go out there in our work for Education Cannot Wait, the youth are the first we speak to. The refugee youth, the host community youth, and we have also ensured that youth are represented in our governance board. Because youth is a new generation that breaks with the old. that still has the idealism at heart. They know what they need to learn. They have voices to speak for themselves. And I tell you this, because so does my youth children. They tell their mom what to do. And when I go out there in the border of Somalia and Ethiopia, into the refugee camps of UNRWA in Lebanon, travel in South Sudan, across the Sahel, the youth in Colombia, the refugees from Venezuela, the youth coming from Syria as refugees, you can do nothing but let them drive the agenda of education. So I just wanted to make that point, and I look forward to listening to you. The word is yours. Not just the word, but the word is yours. Now, question from my dear friend. How we can transform education crisis in context? Well, a couple of things, and I do feel that the youth will agree on this one. We need to transform from commitments, promises, to action. Enough of promises, enough of commitments. Now it's the time for action. The youth want to be educated, and they want to be part of determining the curriculum, the design, what they want to learn in the 21st century. They know what they want, what they need to tell their story to the world. They know what they need to learn to realize their dreams. And here we speak of 222 million dreams, half of them being youth. Allow them to drive the rest of us, because it's very clear that generations before them failed. Advocacy. So besides the design, the curriculum, how they will be treated in the classroom, what the capacities of the teachers have to be, what they need, and what their experiences demand from the rest of the world to pay for. We owe them all financial resources on earth to make sure that they can develop their potentials. And advocacy, hear their voices. Hear their voices and be tough in your advocacy. Remember, you hold the word in your hand. You're the only ones that can change the world. It's not going to be this generation or my generation, it's going to be you. So remember the power you have. And with that, I will end my answer to that question. I have nothing more to say. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that. And, education is a crisis, and we have to make sure that we do not leave anyone behind. So thank you for highlighting what we have to do to transform education in an emergency context. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Asma Rabi, who is joining us via Zoom. She's a youth researcher, and she's doing incredible work transforming education in emergency. Can you describe your personal experience as a refugee in Pakistan and your commitment to transform education in emergency context?
Sure, thank you so much, and greetings to everyone. Before I begin, let me tell you about myself. I'm a refugee, and the status of being a refugee since birth taught me to strive for education, because as refugees, we know the importance of education. Research suggests when refugees are educated, it strengthens community resilience. Sadly, our desires, hopes, and rights are numbered and negotiated to see what it brings to the world. Education is our right when only a small number of us have access to this right. As education advances, the number of refugees striving to access this basic human right decreases. Access to education is a key element of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and is considered a driver for the achievements of all 17 SDGs. The specific objectives of SDG 4 include providing more educational opportunities and technical and vocational training, including higher education for refugee youth and ending inequality in educational opportunities. Unfortunately, refugee education faces complex challenges globally, especially girls' education. And for women in vulnerable settings, the issue to access education and to retention are more worsened day by day. However, as I'm speaking to you all right now, sadly, only 5% of refugee youth have access to higher education, while almost 48% of refugee children remain out of school. Today, refugee education has become a limited opportunity when it should have been a right. A huge number of refugees school children are not enrolled in or accessing any primary education, while only a minimal number of refugee youth have access to higher education. Today is the day when we need to challenge the policies limiting access to education of refugees, not only with words, but with actions. Because refugees deserve the language of equality and equality to all forms of education. With every refugee that doesn't make it to school, we need to learn that education is not something that should be earned, but a right that should be provided. Refugees' access to education, especially higher education, is often restricted because of financial constraints, lack of legal or registered status, discrimination, lack of educational opportunities, and difficulties in gaining recognition for foreign qualifications. Without access to higher education, refugees are condemned to passivity and are unable to obtain crucial job skills for their personal development. Strengthening access to refugee education has an untappable potential to create a generation of youth that can contribute to the development of both host country and the country of origin when the situation improves. Leaders need to ensure that everyone, including refugees, have access to all levels of education, especially young women and girls, regardless of location, legal recognition, gender, identity, and demographics. I would like to call on states and stakeholders to work in collaboration to remove all policy, legal, and structural level barriers and address socioeconomic constraints to facilitate equitable access and enrollment in refugees' education. It's high time to be serious about refugee education. I would hereby like to emphasize on prioritizing multi-sectoral approach and collaborative efforts of all actors for promoting education for refugees. And for the purpose, cultural, structure, and policy level gaps related to refugee education globally must be addressed. Today, through this platform, I want to urge the leaders to insist that we as refugees get good education. Policies for refugee education are not immeasurable favors that are made. It is 21st century. And the world has been talking about education for all, yet in 2022, a very limited number of refugees have access to education. Strict policies have blocked the roads leading to education with barriers of discrimination and privilege. The question is not how refugees should be educated, but rather how to repair the roads that leads to successful refugee education, specifically higher education. We don't need empty words for refugee education, we need action. And we demand our rights to all forms of education that needs to be provided for all refugees globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Asma, for joining us and for your powerful voice. We must transform education for all, as she said, and we must not leave anyone behind. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Jibril Ahmed, who is joining us through a pre-recorded video. So I'll ask our wonderful technology team to play the video up for us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jibril, an MBA student here in Sudan. I am honored to join the Transforming Education Pre-Summit Youth Forum virtually today. In Sudan, ongoing conflicts and political instability have created widespread displacement, poverty, and strained resources. According to UNICEF, Sudan has one of the largest number of out-of-school children in the Middle East and Northern Africa. Climate-induced disaster alongside with COVID-19 pandemic have created additional challenges for the most of the families. The past 7 years in my university educations, I personally experienced those impediments which had direct effect on my educational journey. COVID-19 restrictions was the worst scenario expected as a student. A delay of 2 years to finish my master's was caused by both pandemic and the domestic conflict, which was costly, time-consuming, and strained resource. Today at the TESS Youth Forum, we are calling for 1. to ensure the protection of schools during the climate disasters such as floods. 2. to transform education by incorporating psychosocial support and emotional learning approaches into education responses. 3. to support youth-led solutions in the rural communities. I urge you all to protect education in emergencies. Education can't wait. Thank you.
Ms. Yasmin, we have heard from incredible young people, and many young people are trying to innovate to transform education in emergency context, in some of the most challenging contexts, and I believe this is something you have seen yourself. But as we know, we need action, and we need action today and now. Can you tell us one or more youth-led approach that you have encountered in your time and in your work and found particularly promising in transforming education?
Thank you very much. You can hear me, right? Yeah, I mean, I think what came out of both Asma and Jibril very strongly is the overall action, and education cannot wait. I mean, I think these are the two headlines. And then, of course, you touched on very important issues like MHPSS. Anyone who has lived through wars or as a refugee will have experienced trauma, self-doubt, and gone through a struggle. And out of that, overcoming that struggle, comes an enormous resilience. And I think all of you are manifesting that resilience. So that's a powerful, I think, manifestation of what can become. Now, I think there are two things. One is, what can the youth do themselves under extremely difficult circumstances? And I'll give you one example, and that's youth, girls, adolescent girls and youth in Afghanistan, where secondary school for girls have been banned. It's an official ban, which is outrageous. And they have created ways of continuing their education through underground schools. And this is led by youth and their families and communities, but it is the youth, the girls, who are driving this. And I think that is a very good example of the resilience and the power that lies in the youth, in overcoming immense obstacles. Now, for education cannot wait, it's so important for us to have youth, not only to sit around, but to make the actual decisions, to tell us what to do. And that was my opening, tell us what to do. So we have youth represented in our governance board. The Education Cannot Wait Executive Committee and High-Level Steering Group is represented by youth, who then represent in turn, I think, close to 100 youth constituencies. And the decisions, the steering, telling us what to do and making decisions on behalf of Education Cannot Wait is that power. As I said, when we go out and develop Education Cannot Wait investments, youth are always the primary stakeholder for us to consult. In UNRWA, we work very closely with youth who have some form of disability, and we collaborate with them, and they drive our entire investment in these special programs for youth with impaired eyesight, youth who have other situations stemming from war or from birth. We've also established, together with Plan International, a youth panel of 16 youth where we bridge South and North. And I do stress South as the primary voice. This is so important. And the North youth is there to facilitate the voice of the youth from the South. But I will plead to all of you, the South, the youth from the South must drive the agenda. Why? They lived through it. They experienced it firsthand. They built a resilience very few of us can ever understand, through soul-shattering suffering, determination, and will to survive and thrive through their education. So in the North, the youth in the North, be that sister and brother that helps remove the final obstacles, but let them speak. And so we have this youth panel of 16 youth represented, both south and the north. And I think these are a few examples of how ECW, Education Cannot Wait, as Jibril stressed at the end, is building bridge, is enabling, creating an enabling environment for youth, and also how we recognize the great work by youth, such as youth in Afghanistan, driving secondary school education through underground, while the rest of us are making the global advocacy to facilitate for them. I think the youth can come up with many more examples. So I think youth have, you haven't yet developed this sort of limitations, can't do this, can't do that. You're still free in your spirit. You have resilience. And the world is such a stage today with 222 million children and youth in conflict and crisis. No one can tell you this is not possible. No one. Whatever you conceive in your mind from day onwards is possible. And you just make it happen. And we are there to facilitate only. And it's an honor to walk behind you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll now turn to one of the youth advocates here on board, Ms. Ratin, who is a GCA Youth Ambassador. Can you tell us about your personal experience in advocating for youth voices in education in emergencies?
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Tanya. I'm here instead of Ratin. So thank you for the interesting question. Well, my involvement in advocating for youth voices is that I'm a youth ambassador for the global education campaign in Germany and the Youth Task Force. The global right to education is very important for us and for our member organizations. And in addition, it is very important for us in the Youth Task Force that the voice of the youth is included in processes and decisions on the topic of education. Participation is more than just a voice. The views of young people must be heard. So we want to participate and have our voices heard on the issue that affect us. Article 12 of the Convention of the Right of the Child states that children have the right to be heard, listened to, and taken seriously in all decisions which will affect them. Article 12 forms one of the general principles which should be considered in the interpretation and implementation of all other rights. So I'm very grateful to be able to speak here at the summit and to work on a youth declaration, but this is only the first step. The question is how we will be involved in further processes, how our recommendations and demands will be taken in a final document, for example, in September in New York, how they will be translated into real policy. We should be there where decisions, for example, about the amount of financial resources, are discussed and decided. Young people should bring up their personal experience and expertise on the topic of education. Only then we can speak of a meaningful participation. Children and young people should be supported to participate in decision-making in all relevant contexts and in all levels of their lives. In my opinion, it's not possible that decisions about education are made without those who are most affected. So one example is the corona pandemic. Many of us were forced into distant learning. Online tools in e-learning, for example, offering were able to prevent learning biographies from being interrupted. For many of us, but many didn't have those possibilities either. We are, after all, talking about education in crisis and conflicts. For example, hundreds of thousands of refugees from Ukraine are currently living in Germany. And it turns out that Ukraine is very well positioned in the field of e-learning. Many Ukraine students, for example, can continue to be taught in their classes despite of the war, even though they are spread all over Europe. Without the corona pandemic, this probably not have been possible. We can so learn a lot from this situation for future crises and conflicts. But what is very important for me is that this happened in countries with less developed resources and infrastructures too. Not only privileged and industrialized countries should benefit from good and digitalized education. We should work together on this issue so we can benefit from good ideas and good implementation. This topic is very important for me, and but for this we have to hear the voices of the ones most affected, children and young people of color, for example, students with disabilities, children of the Global South, girls, marginalized groups, and so on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting those important points. And it's very, very important that we listen to young voices in transforming education, because there can never be an effective solution without the communities that are affected. I'll turn to Ms. Vicky, who will tell us more about the Protect Education Emergency Now campaign and call to action.
Great, thank you very much, Nihal, and thank you, my fellow panelists. As mentioned, I represent the Global Campaign for Education, and as a young person myself, I'm privileged to be here today to highlight the Protect Education in Emergencies Now campaign. In March of this year, GCE launched this one-year campaign under the hashtag ProtectEiENow in response to the impact of emergencies and crises on the right to education. We continue to see, the devastating impact of emergencies on the right to education. Children and young people are deprived not only to the right to education and quality education, but also the protection that education provides in emergency contexts. As we heard from Jibril from Sudan, intersecting climate and conflict emergencies are not only affecting early and primary school education, but also affecting higher education. And it's making the situation untenable. The data shows that, and we know that for students and children with disabilities, and for women and for girls from low-income households, the impact is much greater. And so this reality is dramatically impacting the progress of Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular SDG 4. And despite the dire situation, education remains one of the most underfunded areas of humanitarian aid, only 2.4% of the global humanitarian funding. So it's within this context, and obviously everything that has been spoken about, that we launched the Protect Education in Emergencies Now campaign. The main objective of ProtectEiENow is that the international community takes concrete and effective measures to ensure quality and effective and equitable education in emergency contexts. What does this mean in practical terms? It's aiming at increasing the political will and public financing to do so, as well as raising the voices of people affected and putting them at the center of the global education agenda. The main approach of the campaign is bringing the voices and stories of people affected, particularly young people who this affects, to the center of the debate. So listening and hearing, and we're doing this by changing the narrative of how people affected by emergency contexts are usually portrayed. What does this mean? Showcasing stories of hope, stories of resilience, and stories of activism, as well as local-led initiatives, and proposing solutions to the consequences of education in of emergencies on education. Another key approach beyond the voices from the ground is working in partnership with relevant stakeholders at all levels. So GCE members and coalitions, people and communities affected, local and international NGOs, and multilateral organizations. We know that partnership is vital to sustainable action. So I end now with the calls to action. Together with our members and partners globally, we've developed 10 call to actions and recommendations, including recommendations from youth and students. Today, for the sake of time, and that is relevant to the Youth Forum, I'll just highlight one call to action, which is call to action 3, that states that we need to listen to the voices of people affected and the local actors, including local civil society, teacher organizations, children and youth groups, parents and communities, and acknowledge their crucial role in the response to ensure meaningful participation from the early stages of design, planning, and implementation of education in emergencies responses. In terms of how to engage, finally, please follow the hashtag ProtectEiENow campaign, updates on our website, where we'll be launching the Voices from the Ground project that highlights these voices and the voices of youth and students and locally led solutions. You can also watch the campaign video on the UNESCO Youth Hub, as well as share and disseminate the key campaign messages with the hashtag ProtectEiENow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Beaky, for highlighting that and for your work. Let's keep making noise over the next 2 days about education for all, and let's ensure that as we build momentum toward the Transform Education Summit in New York, we do not leave anyone behind and ensure that all children everywhere, including young children in refugee camps and those living in emergency contexts, have access to education. But also let's ensure that we listen to their voices. And I know there's a lot of conversation happening today and over the next 2 days about young people having an equal seat at the table. And I don't think young people just need a seat at the table. I think we need the whole table because it is our time and it is our future. So let's ensure that young people, take over. Let's be in the driving seat. Let's ensure that no young person is left behind. And I just want to amplify the call from all the youth advocates who talked today about access. I think as a young person who traveled on a refugee travel document, I've never had a passport in my life. It is so challenging traveling, and being able to be here today, I just want to acknowledge that privilege as well. As you all know, there's so many young people who could not attend today because of visa issues. And I just urge the United Nations Secretary that is working on the Transform Education Summit that as we head to the big summit in New York, let's ensure that young people can have access to the summit and not just as participants but as key speakers. So let's keep making noise over the next 2 days. And to all the young people here, let's keep amplifying the voices of all the 1.2 billion young people who could not be here today. We have to do that. And I think we are the losers as young people in this, because if we do not take action today, tomorrow we'll inherit all the problems our world is facing today. Climate action will face the full impact, war and conflict. So we have to take the lead. If there is no seat at the table, we have to create one and take the lead. Thank once more again to my wonderful panelists for joining me today and for highlighting the importance of ensuring that we do not leave anyone behind. Thank you so much, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you.